Now, after all that doom and gloom of protectionism, let's take a look at what happens if we work with free trade. Now, first off, we got to go back to chapter 1. Remember when we did the production possibilities curve back there? And in the production possibilities curve, they said 4 things would change it: quantity, quality of resources, technology, and free trade. And I said, just for right now, understand free trade is specialization in trade, and then something magical happens and increased production for both countries. Well, now is where we get to the something magical that happens. Also, this is the part where there's the most math and the most confusing parts of the chapter. So if you haven't printed out those chapter handouts for trade, now's the time to do them before we continue on, because you're going to fill them out and do the work on them as we go. Okay? So the first one I want you to get is the basic trade note sheet. It'll tell you up there on the top what it is. All right, we already filled out part of it. Remember, we got to this part here: advantages, obtain things, specialization, and mercantilism, wealth of nations, that part. Now we're going to fill in this middle section. And the first thing that we have to understand is our government, Commerce Department and all that kind of stuff, they're looking world over all the time to see if comparative advantages exist. So we talked about the first 3, natural, acquired, and absolute. Remember, there was always a little tuggling thing in the back of everybody's mind, every economist's mind, that this didn't quite answer the whole thing. Comparative advantage was the answer to the rest of it. So this is where we come in, and this is how we're going to go ahead and put it together. So we look for this comparative advantage. So the question is, how do I know what it is? Well, we build a production schedule for each country's products that we're looking at. Okay? Now, if you remember, production schedules no more than, we've got 2 products we're producing on the bottom or on the left-hand side, and then we had 5 options across the top. Same thing here. So the second sheet I want you to get, because we're going to do this one and then we're going to bounce back to that other one. But get this one, it's the trade ratio note sheet, and it tells you up there what it is. And we've got 2 production schedules. We've got one from the United States, we've got one from Mexico. They're not real, they're just for examples. We have avocados and soybeans looked at in each country. Okay? So the first step is we build these. And we've been using them all along as we've been going through the course. All of our models are built from production schedules. So we've got these, and the key I want you to look at is the shaded area. That's the current demand for the country. Okay? In other words, for the United States, it's 33 tons of avocados and 19 tons of soybeans per month. And in Mexico, it's 24,000 tons of avocados and 9 tons of soybeans per month. Okay? The rest of it, that's just the rest if you change the way we use the resources in production for avocados and soybeans. So, we've got this part, we've got the demand, and we've got our different production schedules across the top. Again, various combinations of how we're going to put it together. Now I want you to look at something here though, very carefully. How do we tell an advanced nation from a developing nation? Right here, we can see one of the key examples. First, developing nations have a large amount of capital, right? Machinery, that kind of stuff. Kind of like what the United Kingdom did when they started the Industrial Revolution. Everybody playing catch-up had a large amount of labor. So this is labor-intensive production. This is capital-intensive production. So that's one of the things you can go and tell one advanced country from one developing country. Okay? But they still have land, labor, and capital on both sides, and that's the combinations we're going to be looking at. So, we take these, and what we're going to do is we're going to find what's called a production ratio. Now, how do we do that? Very simple. We go ahead and take 2 of those production options, then we do a little bit of math. Okay? So, here's the math. We're going to calculate the production ratio. And we start with taking, for the United States, R and S, and for Mexico, we're going to take A and B. But let's start with the R and S first. We're going to look at the American side. Now, what we're going to do is we want to look at, in production option R, how many avocados, how many soybeans do we make? Production option S, how many avocados, how many soybeans we make? So we go ahead and we just bring the numbers down. Okay? 0 and 30, 0 and 30. 30 and 20, 30 and 20. Now you notice there's a minus sign there, but that's not exactly correct. We don't care about negatives and positives. What we want to know is what is the difference between those. Okay, for all of you mathematicians, we're looking for the absolute value. Right? So the difference between 0 and 30 would be 30. Not negative 30, just 30. The difference between 30 and 20 is 10. So we go ahead and we fill that out. Now, like every third grade teacher's told us, when you get something like that, you have to reduce the fraction. So we do the math. So it's 30 divided by 10. We have 3 to 1, or 3 over 1. Now, we have a ratio. What it's saying is with all of our resources, we can produce 3 tons of avocados or 1 ton of soybeans. Okay? So that's the ratio. 3 tons of avocados to 1 ton of soybeans with the resources that we have. Now we do the same thing on the Mexican side. We've got production option A and B, so we're going to be looking at these two. And we do the same thing. What's A and what's B? We just bring it down. So we got 0 and 15, 0 and 15, 20 and 10, 20 and 10. Just like we did over here, what we're looking at is what is the difference. That's all I'm looking for. So between 0 and 20 would be 20. And between 15 and 10 would be 5. So we have 20 over 5. Of course, again, our third grade teacher says reduce the fraction. So we do this and we come up with 4 over 1. Okay? This one is another ratio, but what this one is showing is Mexico, with their combination of resources, can produce 4 tons of avocados or 1 ton of soybeans. Okay? Some of you should already be scratching your head a little bit. Wait a minute. On the U.S. side, it was 3 to 1. Over here, it's 4 to 1. That's a key. Because when we look at the ratios, what we're looking for is, are they equal? 3 or 1, 4 or 1. So we can take a look at, if they're not equal, a comparative advantage exists. So in this particular case, we look at it, they're not equal, so yes, we have a comparative advantage. So we go, yay! Right? So as you start filling this all in, that should now all have comparative advantage. Does it exist? Build the production ratio, calculate the ratio, or build a production schedule, calculate the ratio. If it's equal, yes. So we're there. We got comparative advantage. Now what I want you to do is on that sheet, down at the bottom part, there is T, B, and C, and E. All right? So we're going to look at this one and this one for the Americans. We're going to look at this one for the Mexicans. And I want you to go and do the math that we just did for the other. So pause it, do the math, and then come on back. Okay, now that you're back, if I can get this thing to work right, now that you're back, stop moving. You should see that we had 33 and 19, 90 over 0. We had a difference of 57 over 19, or when we reduced it, 3 to 1. Same ratio that we had before. 24 over 9, 60 over 0, 39 over 9, 4 to 1 ratio, same as we had before. So yes, we have a comparative advantage. So that's the first part of that top section. The second part, I don't know what is wrong with this thing tonight. The second part is we hold trade talks. Now that we know there's a comparative advantage, it is beneficial for both countries to hold trade talks. And the first thing we'll do is we decide which country will specialize in what product. In other words, who builds what? And then we do one other thing, but let's take a look at this. Now, comparatively, the United States can make 3 avocados or a ton of soybeans. Mexico can make 4 avocados or a ton of soybeans. Who makes more avocados? Okay, we should go and say, hey, Mexico does. Now, notice both of them make only a ton of soybeans. Yes, this is a very simplistic model, very simplistic exercise. In the real world, it probably doesn't work out like this, but to show the concept of comparative advantage, this is our example. So it doesn't make any difference who produces soybeans, does it? But if Mexico's doing avocados, then the United States must, yes, do soybeans. So here we've got who's doing what. Then we decide what are the trade terms. In other words, how many avocados equal how many soybeans? Well, we look at it here, and if we were doing a fair deal, how many soybeans equals, or excuse me, how many avocados equals a ton of soybeans? Now, it might take a minute, but most of us will finally see it. We know that anything over 3 tons, the United States gets a good deal. Because if they can trade for more than 3 and only have to trade a ton of soybeans, we got good. Mexico, if they can trade a ton of soybeans, or excuse me, if they can go ahead and get a ton of soybeans for less than 4 avocados, they're getting a good deal. Now, if we look at it, halfway between 3 and 4, yeah, it should be 1 ton of soybeans equals 3.5 tons of avocados. Now, I want you to think back when you were doing trading with kids around the neighborhood. All right, go back when you were 10. The 8-year-old that you wanted to trade for, who got the better the deal? You, the 10-year-old, or the 8-year-old? Yes, most of us are going to go sheepishly, yeah, I might have got a little better of the deal than the 8-year-old did. And guess what? When we get people involved, fair doesn't necessarily work, and that's where, in our example, it sure doesn't. Because when we get people involved, they go ahead and try to get the best deal for their country. And as we take a look at the developed and developing countries, most of the time the developed countries get the better end of the deal. But the developing countries still get a good deal. That's why they don't complain as much, although they should. Okay? And in our example, 1 ton of soybeans equals 3.7 tons of avocados. Now that still works out good for Mexico, but it works out great for us. Okay? So how does it work out good for Mexico? Well, they make 3.7 tons of soybeans, or excuse me, avocados. They can trade for a ton of soybeans instead of using the resources that would cost 4 tons of soybeans, or excuse me, 4 tons of avocados to make that ton of soybeans. Okay, so yeah, Mexico kind of got the raw end of the deal, but they still got a deal. Their economy can still grow, and here's how that happens. Go ahead and get the free trade worksheet, and we'll work that out so you can see how both economies grow, even though one may have gotten a better deal. But keep in mind, all we're doing is specializing and doing free trade. This is what Adam Smith told us in 1776. Okay? So, U.S. is producing nothing but soybeans. So, production in the U.S. is 30 tons of soybeans, 0 tons of avocados. Mexico is producing nothing but avocados and no soybeans. So, you take a look at their production schedule. For 0 soybeans, you see that that is 60 tons of avocados. So there's the current supply for both countries. Now, in reality, does it work this way? No, we'd still have to be doing some avocados, they'd still be doing some soybeans. But again, this is the example that shows what happens if we fully specialize and freely trade. Now, if you remember, our demand in the U.S. per month was 33 tons of avocados, 19 of soybeans. In Mexico, 24 tons of avocados, 9 of soybeans. So, let's see what happens. Well, we do the math here. Now, in this one, yes, we do have negatives and positives because we're going to have surpluses and shortages. And we're going to show it right here. The gap is going to be the surplus or shortage. So if we're producing no avocados, but we got a demand for 33 tons of avocados, we have a gap of 33 tons. If we're producing 30 tons of soybeans and we only have demand for 19, we have a gap of positive 11. Or in other words, we have a shortage of 33 tons, we have a surplus of 11 tons. That does not look good. And in Mexico, it's kind of the same. They're producing 60 tons of avocados, but only a demand for 24 tons. They have a surplus of 36 tons of avocados. On the other side, they're doing 0 soybeans. They have a demand for 9. They have a shortage of 9 tons of soybeans. So now we're scratching our head and we're going, what do we do? Well, remember, we're going to freely trade. In other words, no taxes, no tariffs, no quotas, no subsidies, no barriers, total free trade across the border. So we go ahead and we say, oh, Mexico, we need 33 tons of avocados. Yeah, okay, 33 tons of avocados. So Mexico goes into their surplus, pulls out 33 tons, and sends it across the border to the United States. Now, Mexico then goes, hey, remember, for every ton of soybeans, they're worth 3.5 or 3.7 tons of avocados. We sent you 33 tons of avocados. You need to send us some soybeans back. Well, if you do the math, that means, here's our trade terms, we're going to take 9 tons of avocados, or excuse me, soybeans, and send it down to Mexico, and now their shortage is gone, our shortage is gone, we're great. Now, here's what happens when we specialize and we have comparative advantage. Because remember, I didn't say we're going to put in more resources. We're not going to increase resources, the quantity. We're not going to make the quality of our resources better. We're not going to have better nitrates or better machines or any of that kind of stuff. And we didn't improve our technology at all. The way we're doing it is still the way we're doing it. But we didn't do any of these. The United States has a surplus of 2 tons of soybeans. Mexico has a surplus of 3 tons of soybeans. This is the power of free trade and specialization. Because now the question comes, well, shoot, what do we do with this? Well, we can trade them to someone else and get something else in return. Boom, standard of living goes up. Or, next time around, we use our resources, instead of producing 30 tons of soybeans, because we're going to continue to get this, we only do 28. We take those resources and move them over someplace else to produce other things. Now we're being more efficient. Mexico does the same thing. So we trade or move them to something else. Either way, our economy is going to increase. Before we did any trading, the total, 33 and 24, was 57 tons. Soybeans, 19 and 9, was 28 tons. When we did comparative advantage, we found out we had one, we did the ratios, then we went ahead and produced, we specialized just what we did best. It grew to 60 and 30. This is why we want free trade, because we can specialize. But there are problems when other countries cheap. And we'll get to that in a little bit. But that is the magic. I said something magical happens. This grew, didn't it? We all of a sudden got more. Yet we didn't do anything else other than get out of the way, figure out what we did best, and freely trade. Free trade and specialization is the other thing that will continue to improve our production possibilities curve, which means we can produce more, which means there's more jobs available, which means we're going to have more things that we can buy, which means our standard of living can improve. So, that's it for free trade, and we'll get to fair trade and the last part of trade in a minute.